Welcome to the Unit 4 U.S. History test. In this recording, we're going to be reading through the test questions and the answer options, and also going over the directions for the test in the beginning. In Unit 4 test, you will find the test underneath your Unit 4 tab in the course. During the test, make sure you read through the questions fully, answer those that you know right away, and copy what you are answering on paper. This makes sure that you save your work, and if you lose power or internet, you won't have to start over when you go into your second attempt. Okay, make sure you click Save as you go, copy and paste easy essay responses that you have prepared ahead of time into the test, and review the notes for questions that are unfamiliar to you. Use textbooks for questions that aren't addressed in the notes, and read over the test once more before submitting. Click Submit once you are done. So again, you have to click Save as you go and then click Submit at the end in order to submit that to your teacher and for that to show up in the gradebook. Do not exit the test before you're done. You can't get back in. If you do, you will be using your second attempt. Don't leave the test open for a long period of time either. Your course will likely time out on you if you walk away and you're not actively working, so you need to make sure that you are not going under the assumption that you can start and finish later. Okay, let's get started with the test. You have 30 multiple choice questions and 2 short answer questions. Our first multiple choice question is, despite agreeing to remove Soviet troops from Eastern Europe and hold elections, Stalin kept them there. What did this signal? That Eastern Europe was not ready for democracy, the beginning of the Cold War, or that Stalin wanted natural resources found there to stimulate the Soviet economy. Number 2, what was the Iron Curtain? The security arrangements that Stalin made to protect himself, a line of guns and cannons that Soviets spread across Eastern Europe, or the imaginary wall separating communist countries from democracies. Number 3, all of the following committed the United States to containment of communism except the Marshall Plan, the Truman Doctrine, or the Yalta Accords. Number 4, what was NATO? The National Alliance for Training Organization, a school formed to coordinate military trainings for the Allies. The New Atlantic Testing Operation, formed to monitor the detonation of atomic bombs. Or the last option, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, a pact among Western nations to defend against Soviet aggression. Number 5, why did the United States implement a policy to help Japan recover and rebuild after World War II? To reduce guilt over dropping atomic bombs, to develop an Asian ally against communism, or to improve purely American values? Or to impose purely American values, I'm sorry. Number 6, what act signaled the beginning of the Korean War? China invaded North Korea, South Korea invaded North Korea, or North Korea invaded South Korea. Number 7, what was the outcome of the Korean War? The two Koreas united and became a democracy. North and South Korea remained separate with a demilitarized zone along the 38th parallel, or an initial truce led to a peace treaty that established North Korea as communist and South Korea as democracy. Number 8, in the 1950s, what tactics spread fear using often baseless accusations of communist activities in the United States? Was that McCarthyism, Marshallism, or MacArthurism? Number 9, President Eisenhower's foreign policy stressed peace, threatened massive retaliation for attacks, and increased the size of the military, expected other nations to do their part, or built up the nuclear arsenal. Number 10, what was one result of the U.S. covert actions in Latin America and the Middle East? More nations were grateful for U.S. support and involvement. Anti-American sentiments in those regions increased. Since the actions were covert, few knew of their existence, so there was little impact. Number 11, what was the U.S. policy that committed American aid and troops to protect the Middle East from communist aggression? Was that the Dulles Doctrine, brinkmanship, or the Eisenhower Doctrine. Number 12, which was not a reason for post-World War II economic growth in the United States. People cashed in savings bonds and had extra money available. Consumers were eager to buy after wartime rationing and restrictions. Or prices dropped dramatically after military demand for goods dropped. Number 13, what was one reason for the growth of the suburbs following World War II? Developers built affordable mass-produced houses in places like Levittown. The federal government offered tax incentives to anyone who moved to the suburbs. Or migration of whites to the north had created a housing shortage in the cities. Number 14, which statement best summarizes the trend known as the baby boom? The lack of importance women placed on raising children as they began working. The rise in the cost of raising a family during this particular generation. Or a dramatic increase in the birth rates during post-World War II era. Number 15, which is not an accurate description of the impact of the 1950s technology on American culture and lifestyle. Car ownership increased drastically after the war when factories began to produce cars again, and the government began construction on an interstate highway system. Computers became regular household items, and their internet was invented, allowing American citizens and businesses to communicate more easily. Or the last option, television provided families with cheap news and entertainment while also creating a common culture and the belief that most Americans were doing very well financially. Number 16, which was not a sign of a religious resurgence in the 1950s. Adding "under God" to the Pledge of Allegiance, posting the Ten Commandments in federal buildings, or adopting "In God We Trust" as the national motto. Number 17, what was one effect of McCarthyism in the 1950s? People supported candidates who opposed McCarthy. People felt a pressure to conform to avoid suspicion. Or people formed resistance groups to question it. Number 18, which was not a factor in John F. Kennedy's election to the presidency? Televised debates, a narrow victory, or an inexperienced vice president. Number 19, how did John F. Kennedy's inaugural words, "Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country," affect younger voters? They caused young people to begin questioning what the United States meant to them. Young voters resented the request and avoided public service. Or it inspired young people to work for their country. Number 20, what caused blacks to pursue civil rights more vigorously after World War II? With the population explosion, there were more blacks to advocate for civil rights. They resented not being eligible for the education benefits of the GI Bill. Or, despite service in the military, blacks returned to find that Jim Crow laws were still in place. Number 21, which event did not play an important part in the civil rights movement? Federal troops at Central High School in Little Rock, the march from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama, or Rosa Parks leading the march on Birmingham. Number 22, which civil rights advocate became a Supreme Court justice? Medgar Evers, James Meredith, or Thurgood Marshall? In number 23, which of the following statements describes the purpose of King's letter above? And I'll read the letter here. I cannot sit idly by in Atlanta and not be concerned about what happens in Birmingham. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. In spite of my shattered dreams, I came to Birmingham with the hope that the white religious leadership of this community would see the justice of our cause and with deep moral concern would serve as the channel through which our just grievances could reach the power structure. I had hoped that each of you would understand, but again, I have been disappointed. Which of the following statements describes the purpose of King's letter above? King wanted to persuade the Supreme Court to overturn their decision in the case of Brown versus Board of Education. King stated his support of the Southern Manifesto, which aimed to bring equality between racial groups, or King wanted to defend the nonviolent protests that he participated in for the fight against racial injustice. Number 24, how did the civil rights movement change in the late 60s? Many black leaders began to take more militant approach to the civil rights. Congress passed additional laws to remove loopholes, or as more laws were passed, their provisions were more easily implemented. Number 25, which laws passed during the Johnson administration eliminated segregation in public places and discrimination in voting? The Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, the Voting Rights Acts of 1965 and the Civil Procedure Reform Act of 1966, or the last option, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Civil Rights Act of 1968. Number 26, public schools began integrating in the 1950s as a result of the blank Supreme Court ruling. Was that the Dred Scott versus Sanford ruling, the Plessy versus Ferguson ruling, or the Brown versus Board of Education ruling? Number 27, the items in the box above are government programs that were started during President Lyndon Johnson's administration. President Johnson's domestic programs were given which of the following names? The Great Society, the Square Deal, or the New Frontier? Number 28, what did Lyndon Johnson support to provide for the needs of the poor and elderly? A new federal welfare initiative, remedial education programs, or Medicare and Medicaid? Number 29, during the Cold War era, 1945 to 1990, the United States and the Soviet Union were reluctant to become involved in direct military conflict, mainly because of the peacekeeping role of the United Nations, pressure from non-aligned nations, or the last option, the potential for global nuclear destruction. Number 30, above are 4 major events in the civil rights movement and women's rights movement. Choose the correct order of these events. The first event is the Montgomery bus boycott protested segregation on buses. Second, an amendment was passed granting women the right to vote. The third, an amendment was passed granting African Americans the right to vote. And the fourth, women worked towards passing the Equal Rights Amendment. And again, you're choosing one of these options. Which one shows these events happening in the correct order? 1, 2, 3, and then 4. Second option, 3, 2, 1, and then 4. Or the last option, 2, 4, 1, and then 3. I'll be stopping the recording here and reading the rest of your short answer options on the second recording.